I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do. I hate this subject because I know what I do, and I think it's quite boring. But when I present, I use people saying, what on earth do you do? I don't understand why you're here. So effectively, I run a communications consultancy. My background, you'll be no surprise because I am a little like Tigger on stage, is that I run a communications consultancy. And we are experts in talking to consumers when they are buying, selling, investing, renting homes. Because quite frankly, when they're doing that, they seem to develop a really weird, bonkers state of mind. Which is why they don't book surveyors, because they think you're all in cahoots with the agent. I've never worked out why that would even be a sentence that would go together in my mind. But it requires you, when you're talking to people who are buying, selling, and investing, as you've probably worked out by now, you have to talk to them in a completely different way if you want them to do what would be the right thing as opposed to some really bonkers things that they do. We do a lot of consumer training, so I work with companies to help them understand how to educate their consumers. We do speaking like we're doing today. And we've got a new sort of subscription service that we're going to be launching because we just want people to really be well educated about the marketplace. And actually, as an industry and as consumers, we aren't. And sometimes the industry doesn't help with that. We also, I used to, having written the property books for which, when they stopped because there was no money to be made out of them anymore, I set up property checklists, and that's purely a consumer site. If a consumer asks you a question you don't know the answer, just send them to us. And we will answer it for them, and we pretty much know everybody in the market. And I have to say, Mike and his team have been amazingly helpful, and Alan, etc., in helping answer people's questions. And a good example of that is I got really fed up about the rubbish that was being talked about buy-to-let. So I decided the media were going to do nothing about it. The industry wasn't doing much about it either, so I decided to do my own television programme, which we put online, 6 episodes. We talk about surveys, we talk about condition, so please have a watch of that. It's something I'm quite proud of. So that's what we do, and we produce downloadable books. So on to more exciting things. I'm going to talk to you about prices and transactions, and then also try and link this really into, well, what are the media talking about? Because the media has a massive, massive impact on your daily job and what you do, and not necessarily always the best. So we're going to talk about that. And then some conversations. I do a lot of work online, so we see what's happening online. I thought I'd share some of those with you, because actually you should be driving the conversations about surveying, whereas I think a lot of the time they've been driven on your behalf, and you're not necessarily there all of the time. So as far as what's really happening in the property market, well, actually, if you are a media person, according to the latest information, and the bits that are in orange because we're waiting for the latest data to come in, prices have either hit an all-time high, or they have modest slowing in annual house price growth, or price balance dips. It's basically they're going up, down, staying the same, they're doing all sorts of things. So the problem with all the price data that we get is if you're a consumer, or even if you're a journalist, you haven't a clue, because you get completely different opinions from the marketplace itself. What is definitely happening, we look at prices, and we've looked at them every single month now since back around to about 2000, in some cases even earlier. And from 2000, if you take the average price today and the average price back in 2000, and you smooth out how much house prices have grown every year, you hear things like, house prices double every 10 years? How many people here agree with this? If this was a property investment seminar encouraging people into property investment, you would all have been putting your hand up by now because you'd have been told it 40 times in the morning. But in actual fact, what's been happening is that on average around the country, prices every single year of properties have grown by something between 6 to 8.5%. When we look at data going back to the high of the market, which is before the credit crunch, where it went to during the low, and how it's been performing recently. And we only actually quote now annual house price increases from 2005. Because there's a little known fact that if you're in London in 2000, every single property pretty much went up by 30 to 40% in 1 year. In 2003 to 2004, around the rest of the regions, every single property went up in price by 20 to 30%. And that was where a lot of the investment was coming in, more buy-to-let, affordable mortgages, etc. So for us, any analysis on property price performance before 2005 is often skewed. And if you look at the average growth since then, we're not seeing anything like what we were seeing before. It's typically down to about 2 to 3, 4% maybe. And that actually means that property on average is growing at less than inflation, which when you have 50% of the country who own property with cash, means they have a declining asset, which is not something anybody's really talking about at the moment, but that is going to catch on. And the big issue with that, one of my biggest worries is, are transactions going to stagnate in the future? For the simple reason that those price growth that we've seen before has helped people trade up the ladder tremendously at no extra cost to themselves. And that money is not now coming into their property bank account. So how are people going to trade up into the future when they can't rely on the property that they've got to deliver the kind of price growth that increases their equity? Now, of course, who's the most northern person here today? Everybody's from Scotland? It's going to take a long time if I have to go there. Manchester? Oh, there we go, Manchester. You save my.
Preston.
Preston. There we go. Oh, well, there we go. What you're doing? How many Londoners have we got here? Yeah. Your market compared to these guys is completely different. Now, you all know that, but very few other people do. And what we do is we've been tracking, and this is the kind of data we provide to the media because we think it's more useful. The 5 high-growth areas, towns and cities over the last year, talking about Peterborough and Lincoln, for goodness sake, and Edinburgh, whereas the worst growth areas, Milton Keynes and Oxford. That makes perfect sense. Oxford went wild in the previous years. So when you then look at, well, where have the great cities been that grew over the last 10 years? It's London, it's Bristol, it's Reading, and it's Cambridge. Whereas Reading, you can see now, is one of the worst performers. But that's normal. We shouldn't get worried about that. We shouldn't get excited. If something's going to go up dramatically, well, it's going to fall back, isn't it? And it'll only fall back consistently everywhere if we have something like a credit crunch that drives it. So, and we also do the differences for London as well, with 32 different London boroughs, and they're all reported as if London is one market, which it isn't. So we are seeing tremendously different regional markets, and that's massively important for you. Because locally, your newspapers and your local radio stations are starved of stories. And what they need when it hits the headlines, oh, the market's cooling, and you're impressed and going, it's going wild here, thank you very much, I'm so busy it's untrue, they want to know about that. Particularly the BBC, they love taking a national story and localising it when it's very different. And that's great PR for you, and PR works for property businesses. So this stuff is really, really important. And when we look at the differences in the areas, we do this town breakdown, and we run this it's UK HPI data, so it's a little out of date, bear in mind as well. But you can see in London, fantastic. So even in London, we were looking at 17% falls when the credit crunch hit. But now, versus the height of the market 10 years later, it's up 58%. But lo and behold, it's down year on year. Well, from the media commentary that you had now, you'd think everybody had forgotten that. Oh, house prices are down by 1%. And I'm going, yes, but they're up by 58. So can you all stop panicking? It's a bit of a worry if you bought 2 years ago and you're trying to remortgage, but hey, that happens. You're in this for the next 30, 40 years. If you then go to Newcastle upon Tyne, you've got an 18% fall. They're still 4% down. There's so many areas that haven't recovered to where we were 10 years ago. It's phenomenal. And we're talking about house price crash in the newspapers. Well, crikey, if they're going to have one, we're all in trouble. Because they haven't even had any growth that much. But they're doing very well year on year. And you go to Liverpool, you say, oh, 12% up. Woohoo, that's fantastic. Well, bless them, they've only had a 3% increase versus 10 years ago. So how we look at prices and how we communicate them as an industry is really, really important, because year on year is just rubbish information. And it doesn't help people understand what's happening in the real market, whether now's a good time to trade up, trade down, and move, or indeed extend. The other issue that we've got, and this is transaction data going back to 2005, so this is before the credit crunch. How many people operated before 2005? I'll put my hand up, because none of you are. Have you all asleep after lunch? Did you all have a good lunch? Right, okay. Do I need to jump around a little bit more to get you all going? So, let's try that again. How many people were in business before 2005? Raise your arms. Oh, we're still somewhere. Oh, he's the man with the folded arms. He's just gone back up. Lovely. What you can see is that we were doing a good 120,000 properties were being sold every month. Whereas now it looks like we're going to be settling at around 100,000. And as I say, my worry is, as the equity increase doesn't come through, because prices aren't growing as they were, is that going to fall even further? And if so, what are the implications for the business of that? Now, of course, property is a regional market. So we managed to get hold of, LSL provided some really useful data that actually shows you what's happening in each region, year on year. And what you can see here is this is each region, so you can look at your own region there, from 2011 to 2012. So just starting to see a little bit of recovery after the credit crunch crash, and volumes had fallen to about 50% of what they were. And then you can see in 2013, what a massive difference Help to Buy made. That was pretty much all happened because George Osborne told everybody about Help to Buy, and people in April, May, June suddenly went out and thought, maybe it's time I can buy a property. Then they saw that mortgages were really good value. So a lot of critics about Help to Buy at the moment, but it definitely helped change the market, obviously along with a better economy. What you can see there is that actually on all of those increases, you can see that each region was pretty much moving transactionally, similar basis year on year. But what we're starting to see since, just like house price growth and changes are very regional, we're also seeing some quite regional differences, particularly in London, as to what's actually happening on a year-on-year basis. So if your guys, for example, if you're running a business, you know, you've got a 2016 versus 15, and you're 9% down, but your business was 10 or 15% up, that's pretty good news. You did a very, very good job. But if you were 15% down, you need to think about, well, what else could we be doing to try and And then you look at the data now, through to 2011 to 2017, again, really interesting in London. Big sort of loss of volume at this moment, mostly down, I think, to buy-to-let, unless you want to tell me different. But in actual fact, not selling any more homes today than we were back at the end of 2017, than we were back in 2011, just after the crunch. And if you think about it, they're at the forefront of where transactions could well be sort of declining because the price rate's not coming through. So is that now going to be reflected everywhere else? So this data is really interesting. You're very welcome to these slides, by the way. So, and if you want any data, just do give us a call. We'll try and find it for you. So we're looking at an area, slow price growth, lower transactions moving forward. This isn't the happiest presentation, but I promise I will cheer you up by the end. What it is important, though, and this stuff comes from Savills, it works through and it looks at who are the guys that are going to be buying and selling into the future. And what you can see is a big fall-off in buy-to-let as far as mortgage sales are concerned, but an increase in first-time buyers and an increase in cash buyers. One of the biggest questions I get from cash buyers is, do I have to have a survey and do I need a solicitor? So please bear that in mind, that actually we do go back to them, please be reassured, you need a solicitor and a surveyor more than you ever did before if you're having a mortgage, if you're not having a mortgage. So that is the rhetoric. But bear in mind, there are 30% of sales out there that are going through with cash and nobody is properly talking to these people about the services that they need. And they have this weird state of mind, well, why do I need people if I'm buying with cash? So the reason I put that up there is whether those figures are true or not, if you're not tracking where your business is coming from by buyer, you should be, or indeed by seller. Because that actually will really help you understand who are your clients that are growing in the future. And if you're not doing well, for example, in the first-time buyer market, which is one of the ones that's likely to grow in the future, you perhaps need to focus on that a little bit more. So the questions really for your business is what's your business doing compared to the average in a region? How are you comparing to that? Are you recording which type of buyer? Are you just in buy-to-let? Because if you are just in buy-to-let, it's a great market to be in, trust me, but that's the one that's predicted to see one of the biggest declines. And are you bespoking? I'm a real fan of bespoking surveys. I don't understand why the whole industry doesn't have a first-time buyer service, a buy-to-let service, a trading up and a trading down service with all of the specialists, or a leasehold purchasing service. I don't get it. That's what it should look like, and yet everybody kind of just seems to do conveyancing. Well, anybody that tells me that conveyancing, or even a survey, for a buy-to-let investor versus a first-time buyer should be the same product, I just don't believe that is correct at all. That can't be right. It really can't be. So I'll kind of leave that with you. And what information are you guys producing that you could provide to the market that gives you a voice to tell people what's happening? What information? You've got tons of information. Where is it? I don't see it. There must be information you can provide at a local level or at a national level as the RPSA to help consumers understand what's happening in the market, but more importantly, help raise your profile of what you do. Because that's the first question they'll ask you in the interview. Whatever's happening, the first thing they'll do is, what do you do? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And what do you want people to say about the business? Are the media talking about what you do? So these are just some of the stories that came up. I don't know if you're commenting on these. But if you've got HS2 about to run through Leamington Spa, as I was writing about the other day, that's a massive opportunity for you to comment to the local media. How will that affect prices? What should people be doing? We had a horrendous situation that I was dealing with the other day, where because of the awful scenario of Grenfell, we now have people in high-rise buildings that cannot move because somebody the other day downvalued their property by 90% when they tried to remortgage. That, in my view, is unacceptable as an industry. We cannot do that to people. And we've had issues, I think, with Japanese knotweed, etc. But I have to say, I think we're doing better communication-wise at helping understand and getting lenders and brokers, giving them more information so they know not to panic and stop people from moving. Because that person in that flat is just had their whole life ruined. Purely because the lender who's doing that forgot that they've got a consumer they're supposed to look after. That's their job, and what they've actually done is just looked after themselves. That is just not an acceptable way for the industry to work. So all of these things come out, and all I do is I just comment on all of them. Blah, blah, blah. And I might ring Alan and say, can you help me with this comment? Because I'm slightly beyond my depth here. But all of these cowboy builders, that comes up every single week. Why are we still talking about cowboy builders? For crying out loud, they shouldn't exist. But we still talk about it. And therefore people panic that they exist. So they don't do building work because they're frightened of a cowboy builder. But there's all the information out there that says, don't book a cowboy builder, here's how. Why have we not changed that situation? This is probably the worst photograph image I think I've ever seen in my life. However, has anybody listened to the LBC Property Hour? What do you think?
It's good.
It's good?
It's very
It's good? Yeah. And I love it because what we're doing is getting people's questions in and we're answering them. And oh my word, I've been doing it for 2 years now and it has completely changed. Now Alan's going to absolutely hate me because apart from being an extreme doggy walker, I think really is the only response to that picture that I found, Alan, but you did put it online. But one of the things that I wanted to do as part of LBC Property Hour was I knew nobody has a clue what a surveyor does in the main. So I wanted to get Alan along to help people understand. The first show, I don't think Alan will mind me saying, was an utter disaster. And the reason being was we didn't have Clive, who was there normally. We had another host who was absolutely lovely, but he didn't understand that I answered some questions, Alan asked others, and he also didn't understand that a surveyor needed to be introduced. So poor old Alan was sitting there, head in hands, and between us we managed to get through the show, which was great. But my word, when Clive Bull took the next show over and Alan came along and explained what a surveyor does, got Alan to explain a little bit more detail, I can't tell you how much you have. So basically you're there and you've got a screen and the whole thing just lit up with telephone calls. And I could have cried, quite frankly, because that was the first time when I think it's about 400,000 people got what a surveyor did. And they cared enough to make a phone call to ask questions. And now they've heard Alan, they understand what he does. We have a full board every time Alan comes in, which is brilliant. It shows that if we do the job and we can get in front of consumers, we can explain what we do and explain what the work that you do. So it's possible and it's out there. And people love it when they know. But at the moment, they just kind of don't know. I also then went online, I've put the link down here, why buyers distrust house sellers. Now, house surveys. Now, I put this in, this is actually from 2005, but I think you'll agree that sadly, 2018, people don't think it's any different. They're too expensive and offer little useful advice. And some in the building trade agree. And obviously, the person they got to comment on this was a builder. And his view, you come along wearing suits, so you don't check anything properly. There's Chris, I think, and Mr. Hall, there was the builder. And you certainly don't look under the floorboards. They use damp meters, and apparently the moisture of your hands sets them off. How many people in the room are you aware of that happening? Is this an education for you and helpful, perhaps? Please understand, I literally am doing this tongue-in-cheek. And this is the one criticism that I have to say is very valid. Whenever I can't, but it takes me about 4 pages, I am slightly exaggerating, to get into actually understanding the condition of the property, because it takes you 4 pages to explain to me what you're not going to tell me. That is, as a sales and marketing person, it's not a great idea. We have to find a new way, okay? So that is one of the issues. Now, I also then went and found this really interesting forum. So money saving expert are usually quite good for this. So what's people's opinion on building survey reports? I love this one. Very nice. They're a negotiating tool. Provide peace of mind. Lovely. Wouldn't it be great if everybody thought about that? 90% of it is pro forma. How many people here do 90% pro formas? Yeah? No? What a load of rubbish. Actually, apart from one surveyor who did do, and I did add up, 70% of his was pro forma. He then got 3 pages of things that he'd forgotten to look at, and they sent it back again. So I hope they never do that again. But he did say a nice little thing. 10% might save you from making the worst decision of your life. For me, it's all about substance. That's the only reason they have a surveyor. So if you've got a new build, if it's a flat, you're not going to even bother, are you? From a substance perspective. And I love this. I thought this was a wonderful explanation of why we have so much trouble. If you make a big claim on an insurance policy, it seems like great value. If you never claim, it feels like a waste of money. And I did think that kind of sums up quite a lot of conversations I had quite neatly. And then I sent this to Mike, and I sent this to Alan, and I went, here, and another conversation that was gone online, because apparently, in another conversation I was having on Facebook, you have no idea and don't understand anything about damp. I think I had 10 conversations with this guy who was convinced that none of you knew anything about damp at all, which is just shocking. He was a property investor, by the way, quite a big one. And I think what the conclusion that Alan came to, which I thought about more, was right. People fail to appreciate the value that a surveyor can add over and above a builder. And I've just had my builder around. I've got a lovely builder called Steve. I know his wife really well. I happen to be into dogs. She happens to produce puppies. Perfect relationship. So compared to my surveyor, who I struggle actually to find the same one each time, which I would have loved to have done, but it's partly my fault because I moved a lot. But actually, my builder, I know him. I know his 2 sons. I know his wife, and when my builder comes around to give us a quote, he then comes in for a glass of wine and a chat afterwards. Because he spent 2 weeks with me on site, or 4 weeks, or 4 months. And either by that time, you've either fallen out with each other, or you get on really well and you're friends for life. So of course I'm going to trust my builder more than my surveyor. So maybe one of the things that we've got to do is it's not just consumers that we need to do a hearts and minds change, but actually maybe one of the big changes is that we have to work much closer with builders. Does anybody here do that? I don't know if that's a good idea, if I've just stunned you into silence and you go, oh God, I wish I was still having a nice cup of coffee.
The trouble is finding a builder. They're all so busy.
Yeah, I understand that. I'll take that on board. It's going in. It's getting in. Was somebody else going to say something? But we can maybe talk to the Federation of Master Builders. We can maybe start the professionalisation of it, something like that. But actually, and we're doing the home buying and selling group, which I'm sure Matt talked to you about earlier, I hope. One of the things that I'm looking after is education initiatives that we need to be doing through the sort of next 5 years changes. And one of the biggest problems is not educating consumers. I can do that, and when I can get them, I can do it really well. The problem happens is when somebody in the industry cuts across my advice. And actually what we've got to do is spend a lot more time training the industry, like builders, like agents, etc., on what you do. And it's the same for conveyancers, everybody. We all kind of think we know what each other's jobs is, but actually I don't think we really do. So a good thing we chatted about the other week at the Home Buy Selling Group, who's responsible for Japanese knotweed? Is it a surveyor? But what happens when Jane the broker gets a call about it and she can't get on, the mortgage company's asked her to do something? Where does she go? So it might be ground short, but she might have heard of them. Do you see what I mean? It's that education of it all. Where's the go-to person? Fortunately, she knows me, she came to me, we sent it to Mike. Next thing we know, 24 hours later, job done. All sold, she managed to sort everything out with the council. And that was a really, really good thing. But actually, nobody's told anybody in the whole industry how we should be dealing with Japanese knotweed. So these are the things that we've got to kind of think about. Who is it we really need to be training and talking to? What's the government's view? Well, I'm sure Matt went through lots of things, but I've kind of summarised the survey side of stuff. Should we have a property passport, so previous surveys? I've certainly done that. I've sold properties and I've given them the survey. And then I've given them the guarantees of all of the work that I did following that survey. I have never, ever had a problem selling home, and I've always kept in touch with the people that I've sold homes to as a result. And we had on this so it was for advocating the survey. It was actually the organisations that weren't recommending it, which is kind of crazy. And the problem, I find this really odd, we've been talking about this today. You've got a car, and everybody accepts, including the insurance company, the MOT from a guy who checks it, yeah? But for some reason, surveyors are not believed or can't be trusted, and your report will rapidly go out of date. Well, I think that's just rubbish. I think we're finding real excuses not to do stuff, rather than actually help people and kind of move on. So there's some really odd stuff which we've got to tackle with people in here. And we were talking about, the good bit in here was about developers and lenders having pre-approved mortgages, valuations and surveys for new build, which as far as I know at the moment is very much the snagging industry, but whether there's some other opportunities there. So just to run through, I've just got a few minutes left. Why do people need a survey? Well, you need one when you're buying and selling, that's fairly obvious. Leasehold, freehold, we picked up party walls, so particularly for in London, nobody had any idea that's what a surveyor got involved in, at all. That was real news to their ears. Once that was, my God, people were calling up left, right and centre about problems with next door neighbours and stuff like that. The big one that I think is a massive opportunity for you guys is extending the home. I didn't even realise up until a few years ago, you can get a surveyor to come in, check the property before the builder comes in for major works, and then get them to come in and check it afterwards. What a genius idea. Takes away all the worry, means you've got somebody in between. Maybe that's a service we should be selling into builders. I don't know. But that also gives you that longer conversations and more conversations with people so that they naturally use you when they're buying a home. Their next home. You see what I mean? Just in terms of making sure that they think about using a surveyor even more. Checking out things that worry about them. Damp, mould, cracks. We had a lot of calls about cracks. So that's another one that we do. And damp is my biggest frustration. We wrote probably one of the biggest reports on damp that has come out. And the biggest problem with damp is they will usually go to their builder to fix it, or what does happen is you've got a damp problem and Toolstation or whoever else sends you a note to say £7.99 and he can fix your damp problem. I'm not sure that's quite right. So these are areas that come up regularly, and a surveyor isn't the natural person for people to go to. Understanding future repair costs. So when I bought my mum, who was 70 at the time, her next home, I really had that home analysed from top to bottom because I wanted to know what maintenance issues were coming up. One of the biggest reasons people are not trading down quoted is fear of maintenance. You can take all that away from them. All of that you can take away. So in summary, really what I'm saying from a market perspective, prices and transactions are going to change over the next 5 years and people's understanding is going to change. What are you doing about that? How have you looked at how that's going to affect your business? Are you networking locally? MPs in particular, business groups, all of these other people? What media relations do you have? What stories out there that you can add to? Because every time you talk about a story, you remind people of what a surveyor does. That helps you, that helps everybody else. And do people know just the basics of when to call you? When they're having a renovation, when they're buying, selling, leasehold, party walls, all of those kind of things. So I hope it's a bit of a quick run through. Hope that was useful and gave you a bit of food for thought after lunch.